Thanks, Steph. And I'd like to start once again by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land that we meet and acknowledge them as custodians of country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Well, what a great 2 days from my perspective so far. It's been outstanding. The contributions of the presenters in particular, I think, have been really fantastic. So thanks to all of you who helped us identify some of those people to do the presentations. I think it's been the most diverse and real, I think someone said just a moment ago, set of presentations we've had in the Partners Forum so far. So, and the honesty I think that people have demonstrated in those presentations has been really, really valuable for us. So thank you. We've got a large work program that we can now present to BQMAC arising, and we'll get more this afternoon as well for consideration in relation to the review and where we go forward. Just some of the ideas that really I thought were good coming out of yesterday, for example, was the importance of enabling data sharing, and that wasn't about so much about the technology side of that. Apologies, I thought that was on silent. That's just my boss. I'll call him back in a moment. That it was more about the trust and the honest and the clarity of how the data was going to be used and making sure that we had the right protocols in place. There's a whole mountain of work in that space that we are alert to and discovering that are really important. There was the whole area of awareness raising around surveillance, almost the citizen science type thing, but we're talking to people in industry along the supply chain, etc., in relation to what to look for, how to report, do all of those sorts of things as being a really powerful piece of work that we can do a lot more in the future. Better stakeholder analysis, so looking beyond the traditional groups, I guess, in terms of asking questions around the biosecurity space that would help those people become more connected, and that might just be, they may well be already doing their piece, but we're not aware of that, or we don't have visibility of it. So making sure that we reinforce the benefits and communicate them around the left-hand side of what we all know as the invasion curve. So the surveillance, prevention, preparedness, early detection, diagnostics side of the curve, making sure we continue to communicate that and encourage all the partners to communicate that up through the channels, because it's the piece that has got least votes in it. And I'm being purely a bureaucrat here, and I apologise for that, but support for that space is really important because we know how critical it is and how benefit cost positive it is. So that was another thing that came out of that. And then facilitating and strengthening the networks within industry and government that are focused on realising and mobilising all of that resource, all of the capacity that sits outside the government space, and bringing that into the tent and you know, being part of the partnership more than what they currently are. People are doing things, but that sense of belonging, I suppose, to the broader partnership is really important. Yesterday we asked you to rate the vision and the goals that we agreed to back in 2017, and we wanted to know whether you thought they were still relevant today. They've got these in the Queensland Biosecurity Strategy. So the response was an overwhelming yes. It's good to say 87% agreed that the vision remains as it should, and that 95% agreed that the goals are still relevant, which was an overwhelming vote of yes. So once again, BQMAC will take that on board and take that forward. So later on this afternoon, we're going to, in the workshop sessions, we'll be focusing on whether our 6 key themes are still relevant, whether they need tweaking, whether some of them need throwing out and new ones brought in. So that's something that you'll have an opportunity to have a conversation around and have input to. which is really important from the point of view of the future. But before we get there, we're going to celebrate a bit some of the achievements of recent times. So in 2018, we bought some work that we've done around the technology space, the systems, and the Partners Forum actually prioritised a number of areas that they felt needed to be advanced, and we're really excited to present to you how two of those projects have made significant advancement over recent times: the Biosecurity Commons and the high throughput sequencing projects. So I'm also going to shortly provide a bit of an overview of where that whole technology transformation space has gone. So don't forget, it's important for you to stick around until 2:40 this afternoon, when we're going to do the vote on that spider diagram that I talked about yesterday in terms of how we're going as a partnership. So this is all of us rating each other and ourselves in terms of the partnership. So once again, the 5 key metrics are the clarity of purpose and objectives, that partners demonstrate mutual trust and respect, the clarity of roles and responsibilities, empowering people to take responsibility and act, and a partnership collaboration to achieve these goals. So those metrics clearly go to the heart of the partnership. They clearly go to the shared responsibility concept, which is also the underpinning principle around the partnership. So really important that we continue to reflect on that. So looking forward to it, Steph. Let's go.
Thanks, Malcolm, and we'll give you 10 seconds to get ready for your technology presentation. But while we wait for you to get ready, just a reminder for those who've just joined us to fill in the workshop registration if you're coming along to the workshops this afternoon. We really hope you will come along. We do have a lot to talk about. So please fill those details in so we can allocate our rooms. Now, Malcolm, it's pretty much time, and straight back to you to kick us off today with a focus on how technology will transform biosecurity approaches and prevent incursions in Queensland.
Thanks, Steph. So that's loaded okay, has it now?
It has indeed, thanks.
Wonderful. So I want to talk a bit about how technology will transform the biosecurity approaches we take. I'm going to give a bit of background in terms of how we got to where we are and some updates on what's happening now. We've got the presentations, as I've already discussed, coming up, which will be, I think you'll find really, really valuable. So the Craik review back in 2017 identified that there was a lot of R&D happening, a lot of innovation happening in the biosecurity space, but the vast majority of it was happening at a paddock or a property scale or at a minor project scale. There was very little R&D and innovation happening at a systems level, at a national level, and there was almost no investment in that space. So there was a recommendation that identified that we look at 3 key elements, and the central of those was to bring together National Biosecurity Committee, CSIRO, SEBRA and ABARES to jointly develop a set of national biosecurity priorities around this space. So the National Biosecurity Committee tasked us, as in Biosecurity Queensland, to lead this work, and we formed a working group that comprised those bodies that I just mentioned, and identified current and emerging gaps across the research priorities. We were tasked with considering specific activities and initiatives for investment around the areas on the screen. So strategic surveillance and early detection warning. I keep banging on about the importance of this. The market access response systems, and a design piece as well. Behavioural change came up as a really important piece that we needed to be looking at, understanding better people's attitudes towards, people's motivations, and how that converted to behaviours. We were looking at decision-making systems and frameworks for large-scale biosecurity responses. So when you're in the moment dealing with a response, how good are our systems in terms of supporting the people on the ground and what they're doing? And then there was another piece around peacetime risk mitigation, policy decision-making, how some of that, what we were just talking about in terms of how we influence the policymakers in peacetime to see that biosecurity is critically important, and investing in it in those peace times makes sense. So we had a National Biosecurity Innovation Expert Workshop in Brisbane in September 2018. Many of you were there and participated in that, and that workshop identified a range of priorities. So there were 18 candidates that were put on the list of priorities that we could have a look at. Machine learning and artificial intelligence, we've already talked about that to some extent in the workshop sessions, and we know that there are bits and pieces of that happening across government, across the university sector. There's some of that happening in the private sector as well. So there's a real opportunity to do more in that space. Next generation sequencing already being used by several responses and in several areas, but we don't actually have a national set of protocols, the regulatory arrangements, other bits and pieces around genetic sequencing to enable us to use it as a decision-making tool. So there was a piece of work, and you'll hear more from Brendan Rodoni shortly in relation to where that's gotten to. Multi-criteria decision-making is around having confidence. The data collection piece that I talked about a moment ago, we've talked about these in the workshops as well. There's a whole lot of work happening in this space in the mining and resources sector, for example, and whether or not we can capitalise on some of that and bring it into the biosecurity space. The environmental DNA is something that we could have a look at. The electronic DNA piece, which is the thing that we use, for example, to detect tilapia in water, but taking it beyond that and seeing whether or not there's other applications. We're looking at the application of application programming interface, so how we actually get the different systems to talk to each other, and that's a real challenge for us going forward. The Biosecurity Commons project that you'll hear in a moment will actually talk more to that as well. Aaron's going to be talking to that shortly. The post-border biosecurity risk and return, resource optimisation. This is about eradication, containment and management. So this has actually been picked up a bit in some work that's happening at the moment around the review of the deeds. Deeds, as you know, currently require an eradication feasibility for them to be, for responses to be managed within a deed. There's a lot of discussion around whether or not containment in some instances might actually be a valuable thing to be looking at, in a deed type context, and whether or not we've got the tools to make the decisions in the heat of the moment. In that sort of 3 to 4 days where we need to make decisions, have we got the tools to optimise what the best approach is around a response? So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of these in here. You can see them. I think rather than me go through all the rest of them one by one, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of them, but there's probably other people online that could also do some more. I think one of them that I would like to pick out is the system level governance. So sharing across jurisdictions, whole of spread pathway works, and how we might share, for example, surveillance data, how the Commonwealth might share what they're picking up at the ports and the borders with us. That's a piece, I think, which is still sitting there as a real opportunity for us to do more work in. And I think I'm going to leave it there, but we will be talking more in a moment, as I say, around the Biosecurity Commons and also the next gen sequencing with those two presentations. So There's been a lot of progress since we discussed this back in 2018. The behavioural insights piece, you heard from a lot of speakers yesterday on this, and in fact, some of you may not be aware that Steph Keir, who's facilitating this conference, has played a key role at a national level in relation to the work that we've been doing in Queensland and sharing that across jurisdictions and capturing some of the insights that other jurisdictions have been unearthing in the research that they've been undertaking in this behavioural insights area. And there's a project that we are discussing at the moment within the broader DAF, and Lynn Turner's online today, around how we do some more work in this space as well, because there's a growing realisation that research into behaviours and culture and thinking and a whole range of other things is critically important in a biosecurity response, and I think we've learnt a lot of that over the last 18 months in the pandemic as well, in terms of people's attitudes. The other two are the Biosecurity Commons and the next-gen sequencing, and I'm going to leave it to Aaron and Brendan to speak to those. But there's a lot more happening at the national level as well. So some of the work that was generated out of that discussion has been picked up by the feds, and they've invested enormously in things like biosecurity risk auto detection algorithms and 3D X-rays for border detections. And as I said yesterday, critically important that that border detection work continues. So as we know, these are just a few of the challenges that we see going forward in the technology space. Technology is not the answer to everything, but it's going to be a big part of enabling us to do more with less going forward. And it would be foolish of us not to recognise the opportunities arising out of technology in terms of particularly that surveillance, detection, diagnostic space. The track and trace, all of those sorts of things, I think are just really, really important. But there are barriers, human nature, not the least of which the whole concept of resistance to change. You know, we've always done PCRs. We know PCR works. Why don't we just keep doing PCR? I'm not being critical of PCRs at all, but let's recognise when perhaps something that we've spent so much time invested in getting right, maybe there is a better way, and it's not always going to work, but it might. So there's a whole range of things in there. Cost, technology is expensive, so that's something that we need to continue to think about. And often we might do a foundation piece around that. It might be, for example, around data sharing and the benefits. There's a lag in terms of the benefits realisation out of that piece. That means that the cost piece is only seen as a cost, which also is an issue for us. Stakeholder ownership is obvious in terms of someone has to build the technology, and often there's not an ownership, which is why I'm so excited about the two presentations that you'll see today. Once again, all of those things that are in that slide I think are reasonably self-evident. Demonstrating that there's a sense of urgency in this work, I think is also really important, because there is a time lag between making the decision to invest and actually getting the benefits out of it in the longer term. So what might we do? Obviously the behavioural research is a critical piece in understanding some of those barriers. So let's invest more in that space. We've learnt heaps from history, so let's not forget that, and let's use that in terms of designing a way forward. I think we need to make sure that we understand the importance of bringing decision makers with us going forward. They need to own and understand some of the dimensions that we're talking about and the importance and value of investing in these things. So yeah, we continue to learn with the community, the broader community of practice, around things that we can do better. And I think if we continue to have the mindset to listen and to be willing to partner and collaborate, I think we will continue to address some of these barriers going forward. So we've got a whole range of things that we are suggesting and we'll continue to look at. These will be things that obviously BQMAC will be considering as well, but the strategies to address the behavioural resistance coming out of the work that we do around research in that space. Prioritisation of the technologies. You know, we're not going to be able to do everything, so we need to make some choices. Setting up some working groups that are across the partnership to make sure that we've got involvement from as many people as possible to have input into those frameworks, etc. Partnering with the private sector and the university sector, I think, is critically important. We know that that works, and we've seen it work in the past. Government doesn't do it well. Every week I get another approach from another private sector company looking for a partnership with us, you know, going forward. It's always a challenge for us to work out how we do that. How do we pick winners? It's not something we do well, so we need to be thinking about alternative governance models and those sorts of things. And I think there's an international and domestic market access piece in here that is also critically important. We are almost unique, us in New Zealand, so in relation to understanding the benefits of a lot of this work. Disinfestation is something that we do probably better than anyone in the world because we've got Queensland fruit fly as much as anything else. We've got technologies there that we can share, but there's probably lots of other technologies out there that others can share with us. So that's enough from me, Steph. I'm going to hand back to you, and I'm going to try and